So thank you, Platinum Resource Group, for inviting me to present today. So ironically, it was a presentation that Christy made at Laguna Niguel Connectors a few months ago that caused me to kind of reflect on my own career transition. And that was in the kind of 2007, 2009 timeframe. So what I have planned for this morning is to share my story, provide some personal insight into my journey through career transition. And ironically, we think of these journeys as having a beginning and an end, right? My journey became more than a career journey. It became a life journey. Sounds a little melodramatic, doesn't it? But I'll let you be the judge as we kind of walk through my story. Just a few takeaways for today. The good news is I didn't come with a lot of slides. The bad news is I came with more words than you can probably stand. But feel free to put your questions in the chat. I will leave some time for questions at the end, but Christy and I will be happy to read your questions and, of course, your personal reflections, right? Personal reflections are sometimes, oftentimes more exciting and interesting than the questions themselves. But let me start with the once upon a time. So in 2007, there was a change in strategic direction at the company I was working with. I was personally impacted. And of course, I felt like I had been kicked to the curb. I had been relocated from the East Coast to the West Coast to take this job, and it lasted a little bit more than 2 years. I kind of viewed myself as a fully competent executive, right? My business acumen was never in question, especially my ability to turn kind of underperforming organizations into better, higher performing groups. But I'd be lying to you if I didn't admit that at each rung of the ladder, my ego grew and maybe was fully out of control by the time many of you met me. But this kind of shook me to the core. So when I left my former employer, not only was I in a little bit of shock, but I didn't really have a lot of skills relative to putting a plan together. In fact, I assumed my professional career would sort itself out. I went off to play some golf, kind of reflect, certainly get closer to my family, which hadn't seen me for a couple of years because I was stationed in Stockholm. It was kind of a go with the flow plan, right? This was probably my first mistake. This was my plan, no plan. I came from the play it by ear school of career planning. After all, I had been recruited for every position I'd ever been in, except for maybe my first. So I didn't seek people, they sought me out. I was a complete novice. And at times it was equal part arrogance, hubris, ashamed, and being scared to death. You know, the range of emotions that ran the gamut across personal, professional, and social life. And of course, back then, my biggest drawback was my own body, my inability to recognize stress and deal with it before the consequences became acute. I certainly didn't acknowledge, at no point did I acknowledge that moving forward would require a few steps backwards. The next part of my journey was about my outplacement support at Lee Hecht Harrison, where I met other people kind of like me. Nobody was really like me, right? Everybody had their own story, but this was Greg Gaines. 80% of my professional network had been on the East Coast or in European countries where I'd worked. So you can assume that from day one, I had no network really in Southern California. In Lee Hecht Harrison, I don't know how many of you have in your journey have had outplacement support, but my journey was about creating an elevator pitch, which we practiced literally every time we met, updating an old resume. No one really ever asked me if I wanted to do something different with my career. More importantly, I never asked myself that question, right? And you know, when I met Christy and Kimberly and a lot of the folks who I know today, they put a fair degree of energy into supporting me at that time, and I can't say that it bore any kind of fruit, right? My Lee Hecht Harrison coach invited me to Saddleback Church's career coaching and counseling ministry doing one of their career fairs. I think it was about 2008. And Dave and I were blown away by the volume of people who attended these meetings. And we kind of knew right away that this was something we had to get involved. We had to be part of this. We had to figure out how we could help. I'll kind of touch upon this element of my journey a little later as we move on. But in retrospect, this was a pivotal point in my personal journey, and one that provided a true sense of perspective and awareness. Because I would end up volunteering at Saddleback, much like Fernando and many others that I met there, for 10 plus years until I left Southern California. And for some of you, you may already know that I'm in the Phoenix, Arizona area. By the way, back then, the more networking events I attended, the more I realized I didn't like networking. A bunch of people handing out business cards saying me, 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 me. What was that all about? I mean, I was pretty good at asking questions and drawing people out, right? And finding out what they wanted. But, you know, in terms of me sharing about me, you got my title, my function, and my kind of work. That was really about it. But luckily, I stumbled onto Platinum Resources Group's boot camp. How many of you are boot campers? Right. Most of you, I hope. I want to tell you a little secret, though. You should know I initially thought my boot camp experience was really not for me. I mean, Gremlins was a movie, not something that talked to me about my failings. And although the Go-Giver was a really good book in terms of understanding the law of influence, I was really a no-op. I mean, why and how they put up with me, I really, to this day, I'm a little bit amazed, but I'm grateful and blessed that they did. So fast forward to 2021. And I've transitioned out of the C-suite for good, other than in helping leaders. I launched my own consulting and coaching practice somewhere in the 2016 timeframe. And I can honestly say the biggest difference between today and those times back then is I'm spending probably the majority of my time networking, defined kind of as engaging with folks. Engagement and enrollment are two concepts that I believe in, particularly from my business point of view. And I actually like networking. Don't tell many of the people who are in this audience that I like networking, but one of the things I learned is that, you know, listening can be an active activity as opposed to a passive activity. I met a guy named Philip Henderson who taught empathic listening, and a whole host of other coaches. Oh my gosh, it seemed like everybody was a coach in Orange County. What is that all about? Heather Wieslow, Dave Kinnear, Dave Rolander, Chris Lord, too many names to remember. Well, I kind of learned that listening is not just waiting for someone to stop talking. It's a way of valuing people. Go figure. So Christy shows up at virtual LNC meeting and puts this slide up. And interesting. So you might say, why is this relevant? Is Greg going to go talk to us about our scale and energy vibrations? No. But this slide kind of caused me to reflect on the kind of vibrations that I was going or feeling, and maybe probably even emitting during this time in my transition, right? Look at the bottom. If you can see this slide, at the bottom, you see shame, feeling guilty.
I'm not seeing any slides.
Ah, sorry. No slides at all, huh?
Yeah, just do a share screen at the bottom and then you'll be able to share it.
Do you really want to see this slide?
I was sort of looking at the reflection in your
I was
glasses.
just enjoying hearing you talk. So
How many can see this slide?
Can see it.
So here's your first question for today, and you can put the answer in the chat. If you look at this slide, it talks about the range of vibrations. So tell Christy and I in the audience, where are you right now? Which one of these elements describe where you are this morning?
Okay, put it in the chat.
Yeah,
Yes, please put it in the chat.
It's super small. Can you do a full screen, or am I missing something?
Can you see it now?
The other view was better, what you just had a moment ago.
Sure. Easy for you to say.
Right there. Thank you.
All right, so the activity is, tell us in the chat where you are, how you're showing up today. How are you showing up today? Enlightenment, harmony, joy, love, mind, adoption, readiness, neutrality, boldness, vanity, anger, desire, fear, grief, apathy, feeling guilty, ashamed. Okay, I'm going to minimize this so I can see you. Any responses in the chat? Neutrality, Deborah. Joy. I like joy. I'm not one who's very joyful, but mind. Right. Thank you. Thank you. So let me move on. Otherwise, we won't have time for the rest. This whole idea of energy vibration caused me to kind of look back on the times when I was in transition and say, boy, at that time, what was I emitting? I mean, well, I can remember riding back from boot camp one time with Randy, and Randy said to me, "Why are you so angry?" And I'm like, "What? Angry? Me? Angry?" So today's presentation is all about raising your level of awareness to yourself and the things around you. Now, I'm not here to get you to raise your personal vibration level. That's not me. Instead, I just want you to consider what your energy level says to other people who observe you. And I want you to be conscious of the things that are unconsciously going on, the decisions we make every day. In my case, not only was I ignorant of the energy I was emitting, I was convinced that I could manage it. I was convinced that I could provide that positive, I didn't smile a lot back then, but I could provide that positive persona that would overshadow anything that I was feeling at the time. Right? So knowing yourself is the beginning of all wisdom. An Aristotle quote. Let me see if I can put that back on the screen. So how many people have reflected on this quote, right? Thriving through tribulations. That's mine. But knowing yourself is the beginning of all wisdom. Yeah, no, not really. But this is about awareness. It's about being self-aware, and self-awareness leading to a self-assessment. Okay, so bear with me. There's a method to my madness, and the method is, hey, if you're not aware of what's going on around you, and particularly what's going on with your body and the energy that you share, then you need to be, because it's going to show itself. It's going to leak in almost every interaction. It will come out in your professional interviews, your one-on-ones, your networking. It is there, folks. So know it, understand it, live with it, change it. I mean, I don't want to beat you up about this, but acknowledge it, figure it out, talk to somebody who knows you, ask their opinion. I'm not going to say go hire a coach, but have an accountability partner, right? Have somebody who knows you, somebody who provides straight feedback, is honest, and someone you can count on. The accountability part of this, of my journey in particular, was important and impactful. I had a lot of people in my camp. Any questions, comments, funny remarks? Okay. So, you know, our stories are real. Our stories are real in our head, right? And that's one thing you've kind of got to get through, which is that they may not always be factual. Our stories help us make sense of the world. However, we can get stuck in our stories, and especially those elements that are self-limiting, that keep us from moving forward, that keep us from seeing the world the way others see it, not just the way we see it. And again, I will say this often today, it's about making the unconscious conscious. So here's a news flash, right? Change is constant, and it can be difficult. So get on with it. Figure out a way, either with help from your peers, professional help. I'm not sure family is unbiased enough to provide that kind of objective support, but it's all about your willingness to get uncomfortable, to get comfortable with being uncomfortable. Otherwise, you're in a roller coaster kind of a ride. So there are all sorts of emotional and health benefits to being more self-aware. I'm not going to lead you down this road of mindfulness, and you know, I didn't honor and appreciate mindfulness until recently, and I'm not going to talk about it now. But you know what? This is my story. So look, it would be great if I could tell you that this transition kind of opened my eyes and allowed me to see the real world, and allowed me to assess where I was in response to my journey in terms of getting another professional position. But unfortunately, I'm a little bit more stubborn. It took a family crisis before I fully came to grips with the importance of my life and what happiness really is all about. I had to learn the hard way that it's really about family, about relationships. It's about those around you who support you. Yeah, that's what life is really about. So I want to walk you through some concrete steps that I've come up with, and I'd be happy to hear from you in terms of your opinions. Yes, I am going to share my screen again. So, concrete steps, right? I've got to have some sort of prescriptive future thinking analysis for this presentation. But we've talked about energy, and all I want you to do is kind of, that second bullet says, be aware. And that awareness leads to the act of you doing your own self-assessment. And the self-assessment is about soft skills and hard skills. Whether the soft skills, I mean, honestly, another mistake that I made, not that I made a lot of mistakes, mind you. Another mistake I made was I focused on the hard skills, right? I focused on classes and certifications that I needed to be the best technology executive I could in the particular industry that I was focused on. I wasn't really focused on until later, and I started talking to people, that I should look at the soft skills. The soft skills really can be appreciated when we're building relationships and networking. But that self-awareness and the self-assessment leads to building your plan, right? You build a plan. I'm not gonna do what I used to do at Saddleback Church, where I was teaching marketing and branding. But I will tell you a story about, I often ask the audience, how many of you have a transition plan? Something that's guiding your actions as you work on getting your next career position. And I would say 80% of those people would raise their hand. And I was encouraged, right? That was pretty cool. And I'd ask them to keep their hand up, and I'd say, okay, how many of you have actually documented that plan? Okay, so maybe one or two people. And so I fell into the same trap. I would tell people I had a plan, but, and so why is that important? Why is that important? Well, the neuroscience says, you know, the brain does a couple of things. It remembers and it encodes. And if you're writing your plan, if you're documenting your plan, your chance of success, Harvard Business Review study somewhere in 1987, your chances of success of executing against that plan are much greater if you write it down, if you document it. And you can measure yourself if you write it down and go to plan B or plan C, or in my case, plan Z134, right? Just have a plan, develop your skills. I want to talk a second about the virtue of failure. My generation, failure was not such a good word, right? Failure was something that you moved on from. You know, you didn't relish, appreciate, learn, and incorporate. So we have a tendency, my generation, to kind of look at failure slightly askew. But the reality is, you know, you might find yourself in an Edwards Life Science that they value the fact that failure could lead to creativity and innovation. So failure is not a bad word. Failing to learn from failure maybe is a bad situation, but failure is part of life. Absorb it, accept it, learn from it, and move on. So the next one, obviously, I've talked about Saddleback. Be a volunteer, get engaged, do something with your time, and do something that allows you to be visible, right? Be visible, be out there, be where your target audience is likely to be seen in those waters. And the last one, of course, is a homage to networking and all the relationship building that goes on. Build your army. Yes, build your army. Build it now. It's kind of like digging your well before you need that water. Build your army. Build your relationships. Again, one of those things that I learned a little late in life, but it has served me well to date. So, what are the 3 most important things you've learned from your career transition? We'd love it if you could take a minute. We're going to pause, put it in the chat. By the way, no one's going to mark you wrong if you only come up with 1. If you come up with 2, that's fine. It doesn't have to be a big learning. It could be a couple of small learnings, but tell us, what are the learnings that you've absorbed as a result of your career transition? And if you play music, I'll leave. Christy, no music. This is just music less. Christy's face hasn't, kind of expression hasn't moved in 30 seconds. All right, let's look at the chat. Vicky Hines, you find out who your real friends are. Your network is key. Endurance and fortitude to get up every day and keep at it. Help others along the way. Mutual introduction, be positive, be creative. Keep on going. Network even when I get my next job. Oh my gosh. This is one that drives a few of the volunteers at Laguna Niguel Connectors kind of crazy, right? It's a networking organization. People land and then they disappear. It's fairly common. It's not, but engaging folks who've previously been in transition and getting them to come out and work with other folks is a little bit of a challenge. All right, so these are starting to look kind of familiar, right? And before I talk to you about mine, I like this one, take care of your personal assets. I want to share with you the fact that I did my own informal poll prior to this meeting. So I took maybe a dozen to 15 professionals, executives, folks who have been in transition and asked them that same question. This is some of the feedback that I got. So does this sound familiar? Invest in your network benevolently without expectation other than to be of service. Ask for help. Can you see this? Can everybody see this? Nod your head if you can see this. Okay. Ask for help, but be specific. I mean, Randy tells this little story at the beginning of our meetings about the need to say, I don't just want a job, or I just don't want a marketing job. I want a job with this company doing this kind of work in this area. Get specific. By the way, finding a job may take longer than you think. Ooh, how many of us have had to learn that one? be open to and new and unexpected opportunities. And the fifth one, and oh, by the way, I would say I didn't really cherry pick which 5. I took themes and used the actual words from the people who provided feedback to me on this poll. The last one was stay healthy. How obvious is that, staying healthy? However, if you're in that kind of hamster wheel of activity where you are kind of just going, and you're not taking enough time to check yourself out, self-reflect, be aware of what's going on around you, it's really hard to get out of that kind of mode. We've all been in that mode where we're working it, right? We're working it every day, every morning, every afternoon. We're meeting with people, sending thank you notes. We're putting them in our contact database. We're finding articles to send to our contacts so they'll remember who we are. We're being visible. We're doing all the right things, except for the pace of that activity oftentimes doesn't allow you to flourish in terms of being who you need to be, which is showing up in a healthy, positive way. Now I'm going to take a break. I wasn't going to read you mine, but you already know my story, right? You can guess what some of the things I put on my slide. So let's pause right here. And if you have any questions, feel free to put them in the chat. And Christy will read or share if anyone has any questions. And if not, I get to drink my coffee.
No questions. So if you have a question, either unmute yourself and ask it or put it in the chat. Anyone?
Cool. I put them to sleep.
Okay, here's one. Overcoming depression over our situation. Oh, that was one of the learnings. Oh, Julia asks, do you find that this is easier or harder with all of us being virtual?
Christy, I'm going to let you take the first stab at that before I respond. What do you think?
So you mean job search? I think job search is actually kind of easier now that we're all virtual. And one of the reasons is because, you know, you have more access to people and everyone's virtual. So it's not like you have to go somewhere. People are much more open to outreach, you know, people reaching out because they're not meeting. And I think that's going to continue to a certain extent.
I think so. I think it, in some ways, it's a slightly different skill set, right? You have to master the technology in terms of, maybe master is too strong. You have to make sure that the technology doesn't work against you, right? You need to be kind of aware of how to present, how to be your best self when you're doing these one-on-ones, these coffee meetings. That's cool. And you can't take things for granted, i.e. Body language, which is a major component of communication. You know, you have to work a little harder. You may have to ask slightly better questions than you used to when you weren't meeting virtually.
So Brent asks, how do you recommend raising vibration levels, moving up the chart you shared?
Yeah, I wish I knew the answer to that one. I mean, the obvious answer is you need to get in a position where you're feeling better about yourself, right? This is not something I know a lot about, and I would actually defer to Christy since it was her original slide. But here's the point of me bringing it up today, right? When I was going through transition, I had those feelings, and I'm pretty sure that other people around me knew what was going on. I'm pretty sure that my ability to manage my energy wasn't as good as I thought it was, right? How about that example I used when Randy asked me why I was so angry? I don't know. I didn't know I was angry. Didn't even think about being angry. So I could say something like, be mindful, right? Meditate. Do something that kind of forces you to understand not only what you feel, but where you feel. Not only what you feel, but where you feel it. And how does it show up? And for that, honestly, I think you need some feedback from people that you know, love, and trust.
Bill Laser put in, the answer is yoga.
Yeah.
I love it. Okay, so Sigmund asks, any tips on building a relationship with someone instead of just telling them what job you're looking for?
Well, so I do have some thoughts about that. I want to hear what Christy has to say.
Well, I'm all about relationships. It's all about understanding, getting curious about them, and being that positive presence with people. And that's it's all about being interested and interesting.
Good. I like that. I talk to a lot of my clients about engagement versus enrollment, right? Before you try to enroll me to be your support person to help you with something, it would help if you took the time to engage me in a kind of honest dialogue about what's going on. You've got to share a little in order for me to share a little, right? But stop kind of counting. Stop waiting for me to talk so that you can get in your objective or your goal. Be open to kind of letting the conversation go whatever direction it takes. The point is, it's about relationship building, and relationship building is one where there's a kind of a reciprocal agreement between folks who are getting together. If you want my support, if you want to pick my network and go after somebody because they work in a particular company that I have connections to, you got to get to know me before you ask me that favor. And I got to get to know you because my network is gold. So I'm not referring you to someone in my network unless I know who you are.
Okay, Shram asks, in networking, the one thing that stumps me is I know I want advice, mentorship, guidance from a person I'm meeting. However, I don't know what value I can provide to them. So how does one figure that out?
I feel like I've already talked about this, but it's about listening. It's about listening and valuing the person that you're meeting with. It's about being engaged and not thinking about what your agenda is and what your ask is. Now, the worst thing you can do sometimes is to be in a meeting with somebody, particularly one, this is a story I've told a gazillion times, but I spent a fair amount of time trying to get to a particular CEO in a company in Southern California. And I would attend this person's meetings. He was often speaking publicly and on panels. And he and I forged a real relationship. The problem was when he asked me, how can I help you? I didn't really have a good answer, right? In fact, the answer I gave him as the CEO of a public company that was in that $400 or $500 million range was, well, let me introduce you to my VP of HR. They'll take care of you, right? If I had been a little bit more aware, I would have said, thank you for the offer. You know, what can I do to support this relationship that we're starting to build? I'd work the relationship, not the ask.
So Eric writes, in regard to failure, if I don't get a job I interviewed for, it feels like a failure after getting so close. After working so hard at something, it's hard for me not to feel defeat. What do you have to say about that?
Ouch. This is a regular. So look, failure, I don't care who you are and what walk of life you are in. When you put a lot of energy into something and it doesn't bear fruit, we're disappointed. So my initial reaction is take some time off, take an hour, take an afternoon, take the morning, you know, go through the process of grieving. Boy, I really wanted that job. I didn't make any progress in the interview cycle or in the progression. I wonder what I did. No, just kind of like say, okay, let's get them again. Let's move on. But it's okay to take some time to acknowledge what you're feeling and what you're going through. Just don't stay there, right? Acknowledge it and then move on. There's another job out there. There's another battle waiting to be fought. It's a self-limiting behavior when you take yourself out of the game and start to kind of process this feedback as if it were the piece of feedback. No, there are other opportunities. Get back in the game as soon as you feel better.
Any other questions?
Yeah, I want whoever put Sigmund, Rock IT meeting. Good, another networking meeting. Any questions here?
Situation, consistently told overqualified. How do you overcome this early in the session?
Yeah, I could take some time to reflect on that question. So, you know, it's not one that easily gets addressed in this kind of forum. The obvious question is, are you applying for the right level of job? And are you qualified for the jobs that you are applying for? Sometimes we're overqualified for jobs, right? Sometimes our background and our history suggests that. And you have to look at it from the employer's point of view. If I hire you and you're overqualified, will you stay with me? Or will you leave when something else comes up that's more related to what I think is your skill level and professional level? So, you know, that's a tough one. And, you know, talk to Christy, go back into boot camp, or use the information that's on the screen. But that's a hard one.
Bill Laser says, don't apply for a job network to create a job instead where you are qualified.
Yeah, I love that response. Unfortunately, what do we do with the rest of the time of our day, right? We are creatures of habit, and we often feel that activity is progress, when activity doesn't necessarily mean progress.
And another suggestion, help others with their search.
Yeah, I like that one, Bill.
What tips do you have to make sure you are marketable if you decided to take a break after separation from your last job and then the pandemic shutdown added to that time? I want to anticipate this possible objection.
What would you say, Christy?
I think so many people have the same thing. I don't think people are asking. Personally, I just don't see employers really that concerned about it at this point.
Yeah, it looks,
It's become less of a stigma than it has in the past.
I think that's another good question where asking your networking into places that have similar roles, but finding someone who's senior enough to want to share their perspective on your background. Talk to recruiters, staffing and placement agencies, get more data.
And then Bill Laser says, showcase what you can do for them. If you can do that, they won't care what you did previously. Be future oriented. And then Ron comments, focus on what you can do, not what you have already done. And then Mark DeAngelis says a long break doesn't seem to cause an issue with parents that left the workforce for a long period of time to raise their children. You know, I think employers are becoming a lot more open, and we're really facing this time where employers can't find great people. Baby boomers are leaving the workforce. The younger, workers are necessarily not qualified. They don't have the skill set. And, I think it's really about getting your name out there.
And you getting out there. Have you looked at the numbers for the retail industry? The retail industry is going through tremendous churn. People are kind of leaving and saying, hey, there are other opportunities for me other than that $12, $15, $17 an hour jobs. So they're putting their name in the hat for other positions. So it's not just happening in the retail industry. Other industries are starting to understand that they need a more robust workforce and hopefully a more inclusive workforce. But I see lots of opportunity out there.
Yeah, so do I. Well, Greg, we're about out of time. I like this little cartoon. It says, I have the results of your brain scan. We found evidence of extensive PowerPoint damage. Look at you. Okay, if there's no other questions, we'll say goodbye. Greg, thank you so much for being with us and for providing some great information. And Deborah Gardner says, thanks, Greg. Deborah, it's good to see you. If there's nothing else, oops. Yeah, contact Greg. Greg, put your contact information. Yeah, there you go. Reach out to Greg.